Hey guys, Ron here. It's a very warm, well, not very warm, it's 85 degrees, but it's the warmest day of the year so far. It's the beginning of spring here in the San Fernando Valley. Where I live near the beach, it's 68 degrees, and here it's 85. So there's your weather report. Not really necessary, but I find it interesting. And I've got the dog, and boy, is he going to be hot by the end of this walk. He doesn't like anything over 70, and I understand that. So today we're going to look at the former home of actor Bob Crane. Bob Crane was, of course, best known as the star of Hogan's Heroes from 1965 to 1971, I believe. He was also on the Donna Reed show for 2 years before that. You know, he convinced Carl Reiner to let him have a guest spot on the Dick Van Dyke show, and then from there Donna Reed saw him and put him on her show. But he wasn't really that satisfied with it. He left after 2 years, and he was fortunate enough to get Hogan's Heroes, and that's, like I said, what he's best remembered for. I'm not going to talk too much about his career because I want to talk about the part that's really interesting and unfortunately sad and gruesome, and that's the murder of Bob Crane in his rented apartment in 1978, June of 1978, during the run of a play that he was touring in. After the end of Hogan's Heroes in 1971, basically in 1969, a couple of years before his marriage to his wife Anne fell apart, within months of the divorce being finalized in 1970 to Anne, I believe it was in October of 1970, he married his co-star from Hogan's Heroes, Patricia. Oh, I am so sorry, I can't remember her last name, but she changed her name. She went by a very interesting stage name, Siegfried Valdries. Valkyries? Even that I'm not sure of, and I'd probably mispronounce it even if I knew it. But, you know, everybody called her Patty. And for purposes of this discussion, I'll call her Patty. So, Bob Crane, you know, the short of it is that Bob Crane was born in Connecticut. He loved jazz. He became a drummer. He was working in radio stations. When he was a drummer, he was playing in topless bars for a while, and that certainly influenced his life in a strange way. But he still wasn't a quote-unquote wild guy. Much. However, sometime during the run of Hogan's Heroes, his life, this is what really changed his life dramatically, I think, is when he met a guy. One of the co-stars of Hogan's Heroes was Richard Dawson. And Richard Dawson later went on to become the host of The Family Feud in, I guess, the 70s, maybe into the 80s, I can't remember. He's probably better known for Family Feud than he was for being in Hogan's Heroes. But an Englishman, Dick Dawson. Anyway, Richard Dawson was friends with a guy named John Carpenter. Not the director John Carpenter, John Henry Carpenter, who I believe was born on an Indian reservation. And John Carpenter was into swinger parties, and he was also a electronic salesman whose specialty was the burgeoning video cassettes, video players. People didn't have camcorders yet. I probably don't even have them anymore. There weren't, VCRs to play camcorder tapes in, or mini cameras. So we're going this way. I convinced the dog to come with me. So in those days, we didn't, the video equipment was rare. Only the movie stars had it. I think Elvis had a camera, especially, in the mid 60s. So pornographic films were not really happening, or they were in their infancy. If they did happen, they were shown at certain, private parties and stuff like that. But John Carpenter dealt in electronics equipment, including these videotapes, and he became friends with Bob Crane and fascinated Bob Crane. And then for, the next number of years, probably more than 10 years, Bob Crane and Carpenter were thick as thieves. Very close, although Carpenter really was considered a hanger-on, and someone who was happy to be hanging out with a celebrity, happy to be getting women through Bob Crane and his fame. And basically through John Carpenter, Bob Crane started to get into the world of swing clubs. Apparently he was eventually into the world of, or in the world of S&M, dungeons, building them around the country. It was a really different life than he had been in when he was married to his first wife Anne, and I'll be showing you shortly the house that he lived in with Anne. In fact, I believe he and Anne were high school sweethearts. So Bob changed a lot after the cancellation of Hogan's Heroes. And Patty, his second wife, was a pretty wild character too. So she knew about, kind of tolerated the other women to a degree and knew about it. But ultimately, the lifestyle was even too wild for her, and they divorced. And well, they were going through a divorce actually when he died. I believe the filing of the divorce was in November of 1977, and Bob was killed in June of 78. So let's flash forward. After the divorce from Anne, his life really took a turn. I personally think, he said that he was unhappy, that his career sort of was floundering after Hogan's Heroes. Maybe he was typecast. Happens, a lot to a lot of actors. So at this point in his life, in the late 70s now, he was doing dinner theater. And I mean, it paid pretty well, but it certainly wasn't, he expected to be a movie star by this time. He was about to turn 50, and that's another interesting thing. Bob Crane's life, this really got wild and crazy from age 40 to 50. It was much crazier than in his youth. He was a pretty straight arrow before that. Didn't drink, didn't do drugs, didn't smoke. But Bob and John Carpenter were into picking up women in every city, or doing swing clubs or swingers get-togethers, and they were picking up women in every city, and Bob was recording. Bob kept a photo album of women with their name. He would record, mostly secretly, the women he was with. As sometimes he preferred single women because he didn't want to deal with jealous or angry boyfriends or husbands, and that ultimately may have gotten him killed. We don't know, because his murder is still a cold case, and that's why it fascinates me. But some were married, some were single. In every city he'd have women, or find women. They weren't prostitutes. He said that going with a prostitute was bad for his career. So these were always of age women, preferably single and not married or with a boyfriend. But wasn't always the case, because he did have threats from jealous boyfriends and husbands. In fact, at this time in his life, when Bob was taking his show Beginner's Luck to Phoenix, he had been to Phoenix with the show, and apparently he had an unpleasant experience, as he said to friends, with a husband out there of a woman who he had relations with. And then he went to Dallas, the show went to Dallas, and then he traveled back to Phoenix, to Scottsdale specifically, and he told people he was scared to go back there because he had to have these problems with a husband out there. He had also had a woman who he hooked up with, literally just hooked up with, and I believe she slit her wrists. He, in the bed, and he had to kind of cover it up and get rid of her. He, I don't want to make any judgments here, but obviously there was a lot of dangerous behavior that he was involved in, and maybe some dangerous people. Some of the people claim to be hooked up to the mafia. So Bob was doing the play. As usual, he would invite his friend John Carpenter to fly out from LA and join him. Now, usually and hang out with him during the run in whatever city they were in, so they could hit on women together, find women together, film women together that they were with, and this was no exception. The only thing that was different was, this time when they went to Phoenix, the Windmill Theater, rented an apartment, a 2-bedroom apartment in an apartment complex for Bob Crane. The rest of the cast was staying in a motel called the Sunburst Motel close by. And in the middle of the two, there was like an all-night, 24-hour diner that they used to go to. And Bob would stay up all night looking for women, and whether he was with a woman or not that night, They usually meet up for breakfast, at 6 a.m. at the Safari Cafe. I mean, Scottsdale was kind of a small town, certainly much smaller than it is now in 1978. So a lot was going on in Bob's life. He was getting a divorce from his second wife, Patty, and it was very volatile. Patty, evidently, they had unbelievable fights in person, physical fights where she'd throw things at him. By this time, the divorce, which she wasn't taking very well, she was threatening him, apparently. She did not want to get divorced. They were having screaming matches on the phone, which the neighbor or the people in the apartment complex could hear. In fact, I believe it was on the last day of his life, he had a screaming fight with Patty, and the neighbor said, the walls were thin in that apartment complex in the Wingate, and they could hear him screaming at Patty. I'm not going to go as far to say he was afraid of Patty, but they had some pretty volatile fights, and she's deceased as well now. Okay, so coming up on the house. And there's the house for you. Now this actually, I'm sorry, this one. This house has been, I think it's in the same condition it was. I don't think it's been changed, really. Unfortunately, we can't see too much more than the gate, but since they lived here in the early 60s, all we can really see is this gate in the top there, and you can see the attic there. Not a good view. Let's see if we can get a little further by the gate. Oh my goodness, and here comes somebody into their gate this happens to me all the time. Somebody comes to the gate just as I'm filming. There's nobody around, as you can see. Look at the street that way. Look at the street this way. Behind me. Nobody, right? Except the car over there revving up. I think it's a Mercedes trying to get in. Come on. This happens the Mercedes is backing in. So this happens all the time, folks. All the time. Let's pause it and be back. Okay, so I'm going to catch the house on the way back, since the person's just backing in actually to the house. There it is. We'll catch the house on the way back. Anyway, so Bob Crane was in the middle of this terrible, volatile divorce at the time, or separation, in the midst of getting a divorce, still hanging out with John Carpenter, of course. He did fly John Carpenter out that last week of his life. John Carpenter came out to Scottsdale. The only strange thing was that even though Bob Crane had a 2-bedroom apartment, John Carpenter usually stayed with him, but this time he had John Carpenter staying at a motel, the Sunburst, the same as the rest of the cast, and renting a car. And Bob stayed alone. I mean, when he wasn't with different women in his room, and when he and John weren't finding women to bring back to one of their rooms and videotape and take Polaroids of, and so on and so forth. So let's remember now that by this time, Bob Crane said he was afraid to be back in Phoenix because he had problems with a husband. He knew a volatile woman there also in Phoenix that he had slept with, that he said was psychotic, crazy. He was in the middle of the divorce with Patty, and they were having very volatile fights. Whether she was threatening him or not, I have no idea. And his career was not going where he wanted. He was in a depressed state, leading, I think, to more and more adventures or failed adventures with women to keep his ego, self-esteem up. So there were women with him the last day of his life. A woman that wanted to, purportedly show her, some loud dogs, her photo and resume too. I think she wanted to be an actress or a model. Better get away from them, huh? Good guard dogs. Can't even talk. And he invited her into the hotel, and she said she didn't know it was going to be sex, but it turned into sex. All we know is that the very last night, apparently, Bob Crane went back to his room alone sometime late being, 1, 2 a.m. Now, he had also apparently he had been telling his son, Bob Jr., who was about 28 at the time, and he's written a pretty good book, too, on this subject, that he said, quote unquote, according to Bob, he said John Carpenter's becoming a pain in the ass, a pain in my ass, and he's a hanger-on, and it looks like that Bob Crane was thinking of getting rid of Carpenter. And this is why the main suspicion, after even starting the day that he died, that he was murdered, was that John Carpenter had murdered him because he was going to cut John out of the action, out of his friendship, and that John might have even been in love with Bob Crane. And even though numerous women say Bob was 100% heterosexual, but that John Carpenter was bisexual. So, you know, that we'll never know. But we do know is that Bob Crane was very security conscious, always double bolted his door in that apartment, always locked the sliding glass door. But somehow somebody got in that last night of his life, or early morning, sometime between 6, 7 a.m. or earlier or a little later. He was found at about 2 in the afternoon by Victoria Berry, who was in the cast of his show. Somebody got in. Let's turn around. And there was no signs of forced entry. Nothing was arrayed, although a black bag was out on the bed, opened up, and apparently, you know, the belief is that some pornographic materials that Bob had taken photos and or films of women were in there. They were gone. And the craziest thing is, like I said, no signs of forced entry, but Bob Crane was in a sleeping position. He was laying on his side like he was asleep, and he had been bludgeoned to death. Somebody used an instrument. Some think it was the tripod of one of his video cameras. Some think it was like a tire iron. I don't think they ever determined for sure what it was. But just one of the strange things was that Bob Crane Jr., his son, who's not really Jr., he's got a different middle name, but he accepts the fact that everybody calls him Jr. He said that his father, Bob, was such a light sleeper that even if somebody had used a key, had stolen or obtained a key to get into the room, the apartment, that Bob would have woken up. He would have heard it. So it appears that that Bob let someone in, whether it was John Carpenter, whether it was a woman, whether it was a jealous husband or boyfriend, whether it was somebody Patty, his soon-to-be ex-wife, sent. No one knows for sure, but it appears he let someone in, and someone bludgeoned him to death. You know, there were some moving men waiting for it to cool down, waiting to move people into the upstairs apartment. They didn't really have any conclusive evidence. A 12-year-old girl thought she saw somebody come in with a motorcycle and then leave 10 minutes later. Somebody with a motorcycle, or somebody anonymously called and said, I was the guy with the motorcycle, but I didn't have anything to do with it. So, come on. Very mysterious, and it's still a cold case. Now, Bob Crane Jr. thought, as I do, that the main culprits, the main most likely candidates for being the murderer were Patty, his soon-to-be ex-wife, or John Carpenter. Now, they did search John Carpenter's rental car. They found blood they found blood in it, but, you know, they didn't have DNA in '78, and it was inconclusive. They found they did find blood. Actually, just recently, the blood was of an unknown male, and I think 2 unknown males actually, but not of but not of Bob Crane. So there was blood in his rental car, but no one knows whose blood it was. But it wasn't Bob Crane's. Now, they did eventually. There was also a photo, of course, of what looked like brain matter on a tissue that had been originally found in John Carpenter's car. But of course, this was gone, disappeared. So the case was kind of shoddy. People were walking in and out. Victoria Berry, who found him, his co-star in the play, was walking in and out of the apartment, smoking, using an ashtray, used the telephone. They said it's okay to use the phone because we've wiped for prints. I mean, remember, this was long before cell phones. So anyway, it remained and remains a mystery. John Carpenter eventually was tried, and he was he was found not guilty. There just wasn't enough evidence. To the end of his life, he maintained it. Now, he wasn't tried until, this was 1978, he wasn't tried for murder until 1994. So many, many years later, and 4 years later he died. Sort of, I guess we could say natural causes. It just killed him, literally. I believe he lost his job, he went through a lot of money, and always maintained his innocence. Now, Carpenter also said that he would get these fits of rage, and he was trying to do martial arts because it taught him to focus his rage, but he'd get blinded by rage. That's what he told at least a woman in the pool. He was doing karate chops in the pool of the apartment complex there. So, you know, it's a big mystery. If we had better DNA and forensics then, I think it might have been solved. We don't know who it was. We don't know, like I said, most likely candidates, I believe, still are Patty, the soon-to-be ex-wife, hired someone or did it herself. She's dead now. John Carpenter, the friend, the buddy, the friend, the hanger-on who was on the outs, who Bob Crane looked like he was going to get out of his life, and Bob knew it because they had, and John knew it because they had been seen arguing at nightclubs and I believe at the Safari Cafe. Or organized crime, although seems unlikely, and Bob certainly wasn't involved with drugs or gambling or anything like that, just women, or a jealous husband or boyfriend. There was a great film made about this called Autofocus in 2002. Greg Kinnear starred as Bob Crane, and Willem Dafoe, who was always great, starred as John Carpenter. And that's really where I picked up interest in this case, and then I got a book based on it, and that's where I've done a lot of my research. Just old-fashioned books, reading. So anyway, let me know what you guys think. I'd be interested if any of you have studied this case at all. Let me know what you think of it. I mean, it's an old case, but it's a cold case, and it's, you know, an unsolved murder is always very interesting, I think, no matter how you slice it. Let's see if in a minute we'll come up to the house again and see what we can get here. Oh, there's those crazy dogs across the way. Look at that. So, somebody else slowing down. I could just say I'm FaceTiming, right? I'll tell you. You don't want to come upon that house, huh? God forbid they see a squirrel in the middle of the night. They'll go off for 10 minutes. Anyway, let me know in your comments, folks, if you choose to. If you have any theories, any information about this. Not any information, but if you have any theories about this. Like I say, cold cases, they really get me, because I love a good mystery, but I hate not knowing what happened. And all the principals are dead. Like I said, Bob Crane Jr. has written a book, and he's been interviewed many times. You can look him up. There's some different things with Scotty, who's the son with Patty. You know, and I'm sorry, I don't know whether Scotty is Bob's son or from before Bob was with Patty. That I'll have to research, but he did a kind of weird thing once. Scotty Crane, he started a website where he was showing some of Bob's homemade porn movies, and then it was taken down. So it's a crazy case. Any way you look at it, any way you slice it. And okay, we're coming up to the house again. Let's see if the Mercedes is still there. And you know, it's just a cold. Wait! It's just a cold case. So here's the house. There's not much we can see of it, like usual, but I do my best. I don't know how it was at that time, but you can't park on the street now, which is probably a good idea for the neighbors. Here's another odd fun fact. For 6 years, up until 6 years ago, I lived about a half mile from here in a house up one of these other streets. Never knew about this, but you know, I wasn't doing the research then. There's a big new Mediterranean that somebody built. All right, folks, I'm going to end it there. This is a long one today, but this case fascinates me. My name is Ron, and please subscribe to the channel. I'd really appreciate it if you've not already. And if you do subscribe, please push the notification bell next to the subscribe button so you'll get indications as to when I post. And I'm looking forward to seeing your theories in the comment section on this one if you have any. Okay, folks, I'll see you at the next location. Shades back on, and we'll say bye for now. See you at the next location.